Am I an idiot for doing things the way my dead husband wanted? Roughly 2 weeks ago, my husband passed away. It's been a rough time, not just because I feel a ton of guilt for not being there, but because who expects to be widowed young? When I got back home, my stepkids and their mom came by, mainly to return my husband's wallet. I noticed that it was missing because he kept it in a particular place, but then I started being yelled at by all of them after I told them how I was going to honor his final wishes and cremate him. The ex-wife threatened to sue me, and my husband's siblings threatened to sue me to have him buried far away from me, where not only can I not go see him, but neither could anyone else. So, I came up with a fair compromise. I'll have him buried, but near where me and his kids live so I can go visit every day. They called the funeral home threatening legal action. Luckily, those laws are clear, and the funeral home told them all that they should be grateful that I even agreed to bury him for his family's sake because I didn't have to. That's part one. Now, the day after I got home, I was trying to find his financial stuff so I could start that process, and noticed that stuff was missing from my house, personal effects and a lot of financial statements and things like that. So, I called the police, filed a report, and rekeyed the house. I understand they wanted things from their dads, but there's a process, and I wanted to give his kids things, but also keep things for myself, and only the ex, who was admittedly in my house, is the only one who would have an interest in my husband's finances. I blocked phone numbers after members of his family started asking me about his money, life insurance, retirement, etc., and how none of it was going to be enough to set his kids up. After rekeying the house, I got a text from the ex telling me that my husband would hate me for denying his children entry to the house and accusing all of them of stealing. I also found out that she's trying to go behind my back and get either the oldest, who is under 25, or her self-appointed executor. I hired a lawyer. Reddit. Am I an idiot for just trying to do things the way my husband wanted and trying to do things the right way? I'm honestly in shock, not just over the sudden death of my husband, but I feel like I'm being ganged up on by a group of people that I thought genuinely liked me, and finding out all anyone is truly interested in was my husband's money. You're an idiot. Your husband is dead, so his wishes no longer matter. Do what the majority wants so that the most people can find peace. We live in a democratic society, so treat it like one. Not an idiot. I'm sorry for your loss. Sometimes death brings out the worst in people because it's easier to be mad at the living than deal with grief. Honor his wishes and get him cremated if it's not too late to change the plans. Not an idiot. Opus. First and foremost, I'm so very sorry for your loss. I was a widow myself. My husband wanted to be cremated and wanted some of his ashes scattered in 2 separate places. His mother tried to fight me on that. I hated her, and still do, for so many reasons, and the funeral director told her point blank they will listen to no one but me as the surviving spouse. My husband had 2 children at the time. One was a teenage son, so I asked him if he wanted to pick an urn for his family for some of his father's ashes as well, and he did. One urn was for scattering ashes, and I have my urn. After the funeral, I received a letter from an attorney thanking my husband's brother and mother that said I needed to pay $6K for having their family urn buried in a freaking wall, Columbarium niche, where the funeral took place. Let me tell you, I lost my shot. I immediately hired a lawyer to send a response letter saying that I had honored my husband's wishes. I had paid for the cremation, funeral, urns, etc., and what they did with their urn after that was not my responsibility. I had scattered his ashes in the 2 places he wanted as well. I know the funeral is over and you've already been through that part with the ex, children and family, but you are not required to listen to anyone about anything that pertains to your husband. It doesn't matter that he was married to the ex, and he was someone's son. At the end of his life, he was your husband. End of story. Now for the next story. Am I the asshole for shaving my toddler's head to spite my mother-in-law? Hi, 33, female, I'm Hindu, and it is a custom in my religion for babies to go through a rite of passage by shaving their head when they're typically 1-3 years old. It's extremely common in India since both Hindu and Muslim communities follow this practice, with different traditions albeit. My husband is from the US, we've been married 4 years. We're in India and visiting my family. 2 days ago, we were on FaceTime with his parents and mentioned while we're here we will have a ceremony, Mundan for our daughter, female 3. While we're here, they were excited and my mother-in-law even asked me to send photos. Everything was okay until my husband joked you'll finally know what Maya looks like as a baby. Maya was born with a full head of hair. Mother-in-law was confused, but when she learned about the shaving, she was furious. This was not even for religion since she knows my daughter is being raised Hindu. Husband's family are devout Christians. My husband left the religion years ago. She has never expressed anger towards this in particular, so it was not the reason for her outburst. She went on a tirade about how I was trying to unblack my daughter. My husband's black, and how I don't like my daughter's hair. She said I don't love her natural hair and have consistently tried to make it like mine, which is frankly not true. She also mentioned I'll start bleaching her skin soon since it's common with my people. This is completely baseless. Not only are we darker than her entire family, but also this was completely out of the blue. I have done my best in my search for my daughter's hair care. I have visited many black-owned salons with my SILs and found the perfect one for my daughter. My husband researched hair care products for babies and Maya's hair is very healthy and I've heard no complaints from anyone. I even have a hair oiling tradition with her. My mother and grandmother followed this and it was a great bonding time for us. I wanted to share this with my daughter too. I can't even say anything about skin bleaching stuff. The only conversation mother-in-law and I had before about Maya's hair was when she mentioned she wanted to get cornrows done and asked if Maya would go to get hers done too. She was 2 at the time, so I said no. I completely blew up at her after this. My husband was mad at his mom, but said we should just have the ceremony downstairs with my immediate family and not post anything about the ceremony, since her hair would grow when we go back. But I want her to have a big ceremony, and she's quite excited about it too. I'm also pretty hurt about my mother-in-law's outburst as I've had a good relationship with her. Father-in-law has been quiet since this happened and SILs are 19, so they can't say much. My family was in the next room while this happened and they heard mother-in-law. She was that loud and was mad at my husband. This was supposed to be a fun trip back home and it just spiraled into this. The ceremony was held yesterday and I'm so glad I went through with it. Maya had the most amazing time with her cousins and we did the best to ensure that we'd get a priest who also trained a bit in shaving hair so she was comfortable and didn't cry. The only time she cried was when everyone left. Lol. I'm so glad that I didn't cancel, especially after reading that one comment saying that I'm racist for doing this ceremony for my daughter, especially since she's black too. Still don't understand the thought process behind that. We had a great day with our family and Maya was so glad to see her uncles, my brother and cousin, who also flew out from the US for the ceremony. But it seems like our day was too good and my mother-in-law called us screaming seeing the pictures my relatives posted on Instagram. She wasted no time this time around and went for her actual reason for being so against all this. As many of you suspected, she was still resentful that my husband married a Hindu. She somehow expected me to raise my daughter Christian, which totally blindsided me. Father-in-law was also pretty much on her side. This time around, my parents also came and spoke to her because they did not like how she was talking to me and my husband was being a complete wuss, leaving that for later. We kind of diffused the situation for now and I'm so glad my parents are still there for me. Oh, and the most surprising part, SILs told me mother-in-law had herself shaved her daughter's hair when they were toddlers since no stylist would work with kids that young in their area. Husband kind of remembered it too after they mentioned it, so she pretty much had no problem with the hair shaving. I guess the resentment was just building up with Diwali. Holy, I mean seriously. Who gets mad at seeing their grandkid covered in colors? The most horrible thing was the skin bleaching comment. As someone who has been on the other side of it, it felt horribly awful that someone would outright say that I would have any role in it. The thing I'm angry most about is the audacity of her to call me up and scream about all this, like I would have responded well, maybe not but better than this, to a nice conversation. I don't know if I want this woman around my kid, but that's a problem for later. Everything was very Indian soap opera-ish for me, so well it's been a long day. Not an idiot. I was raised Christian, but not Catholic, and now my husband is Buddhist-ish, celebrates occasions, prays, but doesn't fully practice with regularity. Both my parents have been indignant or highly offended about my exposure to anything but the faith they raised me in. Attend a Catholic friend's wedding. Don't kneel during Mass, don't take communion. I wouldn't take Catholic communion, but I am not going to act weird during their service. And oh gosh, knowing I'd gone to a monastery for prayers or that our child has. Freaking yikes on bikes. It would be better if we never shattered their illusion that we're good Christians who attend other churches than they do. But imagining our daughter chanting and spinning prayer chimes, knowing she has prayer flags hung in her room from Nepal, they're very bothered. Your mother-in-law might feel the same. Your daughter's Hindu experiences make it impossible for her to pretend. Not an idiot. God, the skin bleaching comment alone is so infuriating and deeply xenophobic. So glad you did the ceremony, Opus. Mother-in-law needs to understand that your daughter is also Indian and she cannot try to deny that part of her heritage in favor of her own. The whole thing stinks of racism and xenophobia. Now for the next story. Am I the idiot for accidentally breaking someone's phone screen at the gym and giving her 100 pounds? So I'm at the gym the other day and I'm putting some weights back on the weight rack. A girl was using a bench nearby and left her phone on the floor, which I hadn't seen, and as I was putting the weights back, one slipped and landed on her phone. The screen cracked, but it otherwise worked. She got annoyed and demanded I send her money. I sent her 100 pounds without arguing and she stated that it wasn't enough. I explained that I'm happy to send her money to pay half or more, but her phone is her responsibility and she had left it on the floor next to the weight rack where people were coming and going. I then walked away and saw her a few minutes later on a different bench and she had again left her phone on the floor where people were walking and carrying equipment. In a light-hearted way I pointed at the phone on the floor and laughed a little. She took it well, but I left shortly after because I felt uncomfortable. It's worth noting there is a repair shop literally across the road from the gym which charges under 100 pounds to fix a screen. I mentioned it to my girlfriend and she thinks I was more than fair in giving her 100 pounds, as if she would rather go to Apple she can pay the extra but that she could easily get it replaced elsewhere with the money I sent. I feel like it wasn't really my fault, but I sent some money just because I felt for her and she was upset. Not an idiot. The floor isn't a designated place to store items, much less fragile items. If she really wanted to keep her phone safe, she should have kept it closer to her. It's a gym. There are weights. Weights are heavy. Heavy things crush lighter things. Giving her 100 pounds is more than fair enough on your part. I'd argue you didn't owe her anything at all, tbh. But it's a nice gesture from yourself, not an idiot. You quickly agreed to send her a good chunk of change to help cover what was essentially her mistake. Socially, it feels a bit awkward seeing her doing the same thing again, but I think you handled this fine. People shouldn't have their phones loose at the gym.